All right, and here we are again. Okay, I don't know if the previous recording worked, but anyway, this is Ambassador M1 from the US SSN, and we're going to continue. This is part of a bigger module, which has to do with the Starseed Set-Off seminar, and we're going to get right into those 1099s. But first, I want to go over some of the preliminary documentation that should be in place before you even start to think about filling out those 1099s, because there are bumps along the way that you can run into. Okay, so I'm going to try to delineate some of those as we go through. So what gives you the right to set off, offset, and discharge? And what are the differences between a set off and offset and discharge? Well, I thought they were all the same. I guess not. The right to set off is written in the codes, in the U.S. codes. It's written in international codes when they took the money away. To postergate, or to put into the future, some type of a debt, some type of a contract, some type of an obligation. It doesn't have to necessarily be a debt, but it can be offset. When you're starting to do, you get to the point to do international contracts and government contracts, you can set off the obligations to some time in the near future. By contrast, a discharge means to discharge a particular type of event that there was a previous contract to, or where there was an obligation of the debtor to be able to carry that load of a charge, where in a contract, or even it could be an incognovit contract, a contract that the debtor didn't know about, but all of a sudden he's charged with these loads of numbers, which could be anything, which they pretty much just make up with their statutes and codes. But anyway, that there's a preceding charge. The discharge is the taking away of what could be explains of sort of like a syringe, like an injection, where the court or someone charges something, charges an instrument, charges a case with a particular amount of fluid, of value, of numeric value, and that is, you're able to discharge that. Now that's an art, because discharge has nothing to do with putting something off into the future. You're discharging by a right. The right, obviously, because there is no money. Now the offset is different. An offset is what the IRS does, or some authority that may presume to have a notice that where funds that go from point A to point B, in other words, could be like the Treasury or some tax payment, can be offset. I call it a derailment. They derail that flow of energy from going from point A to point B. They offset that onto a third party that is a claimant, a separate claimant for those funds. So that's an offset. You can do an offset as well, but that's sort of an advanced concept. Anyway, those are what have to do with those rights to set off, offset, and discharge. You can place these into the future. You have to do that by an administrative process, by declaring that there exists some type of a contract, which is a simple security agreement. And I say simple, it's not the same as the secured party security agreement. That's different. Secured party security agreement is done between entities of a similar interest, right? And one is you and that contract that somebody created, and you're trying to create these two separate entities. In this case, it's a completely different entity with a different IRS ITIN number, and that you can offset that into the future. You can also restate the contract to offset it into the future by changing the terms of that contract. Now, bonds. Who has the right to use bonds? Bonds can be private bonds. Bonds can be public bonds. Bonds can be government bonds. And who has the right to be able to use those? Well, we've been told a lot of times, especially being international, being foreign, that we can't use bonds. But then we heard that they tell, these gurus sometimes tell their own people that they can't use bonds. Well, the difference is, if you're a U.S. citizen, you're not supposed to be using bonds because you're deemed to not be a creditor or a grantor. It changes, though, when you operate from that grantor-creditor side. And which bonds are the right ones? Well, the safest bonds to use are those government bonds. If you don't know how to write a bond, if you don't have the proper experience and to know how to lodge the bonds, deposit the bonds, reinvest those bonds, and direct and assign or cede those bonds to another party, the easiest bonds to be able to use are the GSA bonds, which we'll get to in another class. So what's the tax credit? Forms of discharge and set-off. Well, the tax credit precludes you doing a little bit of paperwork. You've heard about these documents already, the Forms 56. For most part, I've said before that you should be filing a Form 56F. It's F56, big F, small f, 56, big F. The 1099 series are those documents. Now remember, the 1099 series is red. They're red for a reason. The reason is because they're executory, grantor-employer documents. And those documents are supposed to be used by employers. If you've already gotten an EIN number, a 98 EIN number, you're already authorized to use those 1099s. And they ask you before giving you an EIN number, will you have employees? It's the first indication that you're able to use those 1099s. Most of us opt to say no employees, so no 1099s. Now, the concept of returns. Are you going to be filing a 1040 or 1041? Well, it depends. If your estate is set up, you're going to be doing 1041 returns. Now, remember, the return only creates the circuit from the origin of the creation of the credit, the creation of that monetary value, and its conduit coming back to its source. It doesn't mean that you're going to get a refund. The refunds are separate. Refunds mean that you will transfer a certain amount of credit from point A to point B. Remember the concept of withholding. Withholding is to withhold a credit or an amount of value. Usually it's the IRS's function. Because they function on both sides, the public and the private, both sides, the public side and the private side, they assume themselves to be the withholders of the credit. Now, they assign that and tell them that the other people are withholders because their franchise entities are people with EIN numbers, Social Security numbers. Those are their little franchises, the franchises they use for withholding. So the return is just the claim for that return. The refund is a different story. So we need to get into that. And the enforcement of the 1099s is important because a lot of you are, after hearing this brief presentation, are going to start doing your proper 1099 so that they're accepted, and you will now need to enforce them and make sure that they're applied, that credit is applied to the proper accounts. Now, remember the 1099 OID controversy. Who can and can't? Well, if you're not either a secured party, if you haven't expatriated, or if you're not foreign, that 8281 is a hard form to be able to fill out and do it correctly. We'll go over two of the elements, or the basic elements, to be able to fill those out correctly. It's not difficult. It really isn't. It's just that what it calls for in the forms is what most people think is something else. It's not what the obvious is. So the other form is the 8811. The 8811 is a similar form. It's the form for either a REMIC or a CDO, a collateralized debt obligation, which in both instances are what it's calling for is a movable or an immovable. When both instances you're supposed to be using that 8811. It either has to do with a mortgage or it has to do with some type of a debt obligation, collateralized or not. So we need to check off those two boxes, and it's even a simpler form than the 8281, but it needs to be filled out as well. Your supporting documentation is the W-8. Some people use the W-8 BEN for certain purposes, for banking purposes. W-8 IMY, an intermediary. Your banks, if you're a foreign or you're trying to get a U.S. bank account, they'll place you as an intermediary, whereas the bank must be an intermediary, therefore calling the foreigner to fill out that intermediary and place the bank as their intermediary. Otherwise, they place themselves as the beneficiary if you don't have a trust set up in the U.S. The 2848, the power of attorney, it's important you have the actual forms for tax purposes and you have a private power of attorney. So the private power of attorney can be a private attorney general or power of attorney general, which we were using in the past, or it can be a private power of attorney that gives that foreign entity that you've created power over the franchise or the all caps name or the SSN. The methodology is important because most people talk about a banker's acceptance, which is not fine and dandy, but the presumption is that we're all banks. We're all private issues, we're all private banks, etc. Well, we are, but not all of us have declared that so. Haven't done the paperwork to be able to position yourself as a banker. One of the package of paperworks is the secured party creditor. The other ones are the expatriation documents and the statute security documents. So the proper term would be a trade acceptance. Trade acceptances are more globally accepted for anyone on the public or the private. So think about that when you're thinking about an acceptance. This can be attributed to the acceptance for value or acceptance for honor, or maybe not. So the acceptance is the acceptance of the charges or acceptance of a contract, and then placed onto the ledger of a UCC, non-UCC or UCC1, depending on the application. You're going to be using instruments as part of the 1099s. Your UCCs need to reflect that because that's your ledger. People say, well, where's the ledger? Your ledger is a UCC. That's the real beauty of the UCC filings. It has little or nothing to do with if there's a contract or not. It means you have a UCC contract trust account. You have the account. You have created an account by the different methods that are out there. And I'd like to say that after so many years of dealing with it, there's finally a consensus in different places on what that UCC is and what it does. But for me, the UCC is a ledger. And in that ledger is where your contracts, your security agreements, even your 1099s, and your instruments must go on before sending them out. So we talked about the different types of UCCs, a non-UCC maritime lien, 30 years, the secret lien, or the UCC1 agriculture lien. Are you going to record it in the county, or you're not going to record it in the county? Believe it or not, the secret lien, the 30-year lien, does not need to be recorded in the county for it to be effective. Effective means that the claim has been perfected. The claim in perfection is a non-UCC, public finance, 30-year secret maritime lien. You can record a UCC1 and a UCC3 posteriorly into the county to make it effective. Either way works. We do both. And finally, your tax forms. Everyone should be reporting something on the tax forms. Mind you, the IRS will test you. They test almost everybody coming in the door. It's the test for your heart. Where are you at? Do you take personally a letter that says that you owe? Do you take it as some type of a sin or some type of an obligation? Or is it just some type of an accounting that they're asking for? Remember, the IRS is not different than any other entity. They want their cut. The administrative process or the notarial process, believe it or not, there are many. The notarial protest is one type of administrative process out of many. You can actually do an administrative process with 2 or 3, preferably 3 witnesses, and that could be your administrative process. There is no problem with that. As a matter of fact, your private security agreement, when you contract or recontract, can be done with 2 parties only. And it's an effective and valid security agreement. No notary. Make sure that your documentation is in place. We'll go over that if we can. So this is the first item on the first package that we sent out. And that first item has the following elements to it. The certificate of service, which is the document you see in front of you. The affidavit of negative averment, which is sort of a mock court case. It actually has you suing that other, or placing them as the defendant and you as the plaintiff, in blank. It's not really recorded, but you're letting them know that that's the next step, you filing a claim against them. This is sort of an aggressive way to make a claim, to have an administrative process, and it does include, this one does include a notary, but you don't have to. And this is for a mortgage. So you eliminate the elements of the mortgage, and when it's a movable item, such as a credit card or an auto loan. So number 3 is the bill of conveyance. You've heard of the reconveyance. Well, this conveyance is the reconveyance after the payment back into your name, the title of that property. The assessor's parcel number letter is the letter to the recorder. And you're telling them to remove any information that is attached through the property of yours. In other words, your social security number and all your identifying documents as that title change happens. Because the entities that are attached to the title, to the deeds, to the different deeds of trusts, and trust agreements that are in the county always carry with them individuals and their SSN numbers. So the APN number will tell the assessor's parcel or the assessor for that county to not include your identifying information. That's very important for it to go back into the public. There is a secured promissory note. You have two promissory notes down there. You have a secured promissory note and you have a promissory note. The secured promissory note is tied to your documentation as a secured party, as a grantor and a creditor, and it places you as the grantor of credit. The promissory note is just like your standard note, whereas you promise to pay. You need to fulfill the public side and the private side, not just exclaim, throw your arms up and say, hey, I'm the private side, I gave that credit. No, you need to comply with both sides. That's why you're doing two different OIDs in these processes. You're doing the standard OID into where you're claiming the credit, and then you're doing another OID, a corrected one, where you're going to receive the credit back because you're telling the IRS that you were the originator of that credit and you're claiming the entire contract. I believe it's number 1. And 4 is the increased amount. Sorry, it's the other way around. The increased amount, the full contract, full mortgage goes in space 4, and the amount that is the loan is for, it goes in space 1. So it's a little confusing there, but we'll go over it. So you have your UCC1. Every single contract, whether it's there's a contract or a mortgage or some type of a debt out there, you need to create a separate UCC1. Okay, there's also controversy where people are sticking their existing contracts under your secured party contract. I would not do that unless you're creating bonds for projects and etc. If you're doing things in pro of your secured status and that one contract, I wouldn't commingle debts and things like that in yours. I would use a brand new UCC1 or non-UCC with the addendums. Again, the promissory note, number 8, and that's going to be your standard note to public. And you're going to sign it, and there will be 2 witnesses. The witnesses are not going to be the other side. They're going to be independent witnesses. Your security agreement, the same thing. There's only 2 independent witnesses in a very short 1.5 pages. And then we'll go over the 1099A, the B, the OID. Are you going to be filing a 1040, a 1040 NR, a 1041, or a 1042? Those are all different forms that need to be accounted for. Which position are you in? If you're not a U.S. citizen, you should not be doing 1040s. You should be doing 1040 NRs. Non-residents. If you're a domestic estate or a domestic trust, you should be doing a 1041. If you're a foreign estate or a foreign trust, you should be doing 1040 NRs. If you're a standard foreign person with no claim, you should be doing a 1042. Anyway, the surety bond is standard form 28. That should be filled out as usual with most of these documentations. And the acknowledge of final payments. And it's a Department of Agriculture form wherein everything comes back to its source. We might have time to go over them. I'll show you them very quickly though. So here's a version of the negative averment. It's basically just a court claim. That goes along with your documentation. It's a counterclaim. It has your it cites your fee schedule for failure to respond, etc., and all that kind of good stuff. So you're simultaneously doing, as you're sending that first package out, you're letting them know what the consequences are for not responding or not complying with your terms. You're setting the terms here. The bill of conveyance, very simple. You're the grantor and you're reconveying that contract, hopefully into a trust, not back into another debtor. your APN letter, which is letter to the assessor, and your revocation of election. It says the key to exit the U.S. tax club. Yeah, revocation of election is very important because somebody is elected to have you in a different status. You start to use this revocation of election as you would the standard form 28. Your secured promissory note. A UCC1. The UCC1 needs to be filed with a security agreement. You need to use the national form. Don't use other forms. Your standard promissory note. Your security agreement is 1 1/2 pages. That's it. That's all you need for a security agreement, but it's very important to have it on file. And your surety bond. Acknowledge of final payment. This is Form RD 451-20, and it pretty much states the obvious. The date, the amount of the treasury check, what you're supposed to be getting back, the account number, and you need to forward the promissory note or bond. This is the form that most title companies use to get the final payment back, except they don't give it to the originator. You're supposed to get that money back through this form. Okay, we'll be right back. All right, then back we are. Okay, let me put this a little bigger, hopefully, because we might have a small screen. All right, here's the standard. Okay, what I've done is I've taken an existing document that seems to be on the right track. It was still missing some elements, but I went ahead and filled the missing items that weren't in there. And the reason why I'm doing this type of recording is because when I'm in a group, lots of questions come up, and we don't get to the end because of that. The time runs out. So I'm going ahead and give the information out, and later we'll have a questions and answers, that type of good stuff. That's better because I don't stop yakking either. I just keep going, and that's just, as a physician, I kind of do that for education. But in this instance, there's a lot to go over very quickly, and I need to go over those points, otherwise I might forget. But like I say, the questions will be held for another meeting. So anyway, here's a 1096. Now, this was a version way back in 2012. We're talking 7-8 years ago, when things were just getting rolling on the OID. Like I say, the OIDs have been around for a long time, ever since I can remember, ever since paper was the only thing available. So one of the questions was, and people don't fill in, is this for official use part? Now, what would that be, and why the heck would you fill that out? Isn't official use the IRS? Well, no. The IRS could be official if you're not the official, but you're the official in this case. So fill this out. And this number is very important in every single 1096. Remember what this is. It's a transmittal. It's a transfer of funds. Now, what's being used now are the 1099 electronic versions and filings, filing sources. But it's funny because a lot of people are doing the filings, getting them accepted, and the IRS is still not accepting it. They still test you. They're sitting there with credits, and they still want to charge people, and it's not proper. But I guess they're still in there, show me that you're competent enough to handle this mode. So that's fine. We'll deal with it later as things come up. The important thing is that they don't use you filing this document in the wrong manner as an excuse. that they go through without a hitch every single time, and that you get a confirmation of those filings, which is only one company that I know of the 5 or 6 that are out there that do 1099s, gives you an actual confirmation code from the IRS. I mean, besides the actual fire system itself, and the IRS electronic system is Great Land yearly. So I would encourage everybody to open an account. It is the more expensive version. It's anywhere from $3 to $5 for each single filing. She says, is that a problem? This is your best option because they will tell you when your 1099s are not accepted, and they will tell you when they are accepted. Not only that, they will generate a 1096. The 1096 isn't for you to file. It's just for you to have it instead of if something comes up. Now, because I don't know if the previous recording or some of the other recordings that I did today went through, but I had mentioned that our bonds and our UCC packages that we do for high net worth individuals are all on the blockchain. They're all on the International Interplanetary File System. They're on the blockchain. They're on the Ethereum chain. And that information would go up here. Any separate filing venues would go in here. Now, this is used specifically for their stamps and things like that, but remember that you're coming in as the official. If anybody contracts our expatriation, repatriation documents, it actually starts out with official notice. You're the official. So don't be afraid of filling these. You have to fill these out if you're doing it by paper. They'll reject it or it'll go right in the trash. So it's very important that you fill this block out. What are those numbers? Well, we're going to talk about them right now. So get your yearly account, your Great Land account, and start to generate the information that's necessary. So here it says John Quincy private. Don't use private, please. You either use the all caps or the following information that we'll be putting forward is if you're on the WIFIT program. The WIFIT program is a widely held fixed investment trust. The widely held fixed investment trust is stipulated, it's annotated in Title 26, 1.1271 through 1.1276G. That's 5G. I didn't want to say 5G, I guess I said 6G, but it's 5G. That's the range of codes that it gives you the ability to be able to file in this manner. Now, if you're not on the WIFIT program, which there's just a couple of precursors that we'll go through after this, that are not necessitated for you to be able to file these documents as an employer, but using your own all capital name. So this is the A. Now we're going to be using 3 different examples. The employer identification, I didn't fill this out, but it should have been filled out. Employer identification number, it's either or. Whoever's representing this entity up here, which in this case it could be the last name, first name variation, the proper case variation. It should be agent in commerce down here. That should be your title. The person to contact generally will have their 98 number and or their estate number and have the social security number as well. So when it's just a social security number, when you're probably going to run into a little bit of controversy, they're going to ask some questions, you're running straight from the social security number. So I'm not going to even get involved in the estate or the 98 or any other trust number. This is just strictly from the social security number point of view. So that being said, we're going to forge on. This is the A's. We have 3 A's. The 3 A's for this one are going to add up on the same amounts. Most of the 1099s are going to have the same amount of the federal income tax withheld and the total amount because there's no variation. There's a signature, and here's 28 U.S.C. section 1746(1), which you can look up. It gives you another substantiation for the filling out of these documents. And when you fill out an A, or an OID, or a B, or a C, which we're going to go over too, The first time you fill them out, none of these boxes should be filled out at all. Okay? It's only when you come back, and that's usually just with the A and the OID the second time around, or if you filed electronically and they've rejected it, because they will reject these forms. 1099As, they're usually accept, no matter what information is on there, because it's just a claim. It's just a loose claim on information. You have to substantiate the rest of it. So the WFIT is a widely held fixed investment trust. The IRS deems all human beings with their signature and their substantiated signature through a birth certificate and an SSN as a fungible, agricultural, commodity-producing, non-mortgage, widely held fixed investment trust. The widely held fixed investment trust is generally designated behind the all caps name. 4 spaces here, they don't have the 4 spaces, you put a comma. Generally, if you have the room with your name, you put the 4 spaces in the WFIT. This is for a mortgage. Okay? When it's all movable items, a car, a credit card, any other type of contract or debt that's paper, that's a movable item, it's an NM WFIT, non-mortgage WFIT, which is what the original is. The original all caps name is an NM WFIT. Now you can choose to not use these at all, but the fact that you use the WFIT name behind it and you cite the codes in these documents, it tells the IRS that you're going to be handling yourself as a non-mortgage, widely held fixed investment trust from here on out. The only thing is that you have to produce a documentation, which isn't that difficult. So here, the lender, all caps everything, no boxes filled out, and if this is you, not you, but, well, the entity, you're going to stylize, and this goes for the electronic version too. When it calls out for your WFIT or non-WFIT or just your all caps name, you fill out your social security number as an EIN number. Why? Because you want to have your social security number with 1 dash. That's the key. That's the key that they're going to draw it from it's your social security number, but with 1 dash. Why? Because you're the employer. You're not coming in as a social security. Now, I don't know what this is. This appears to be Bank of America's. Now, what they were doing is they were placing the lender as an EIN, and they were naturally just placing the borrower as a social security. That's wrong. Okay? I would have both as an EIN number because that's what they are. They're an EIN number too. So I wouldn't stylize an EIN number as a social, but you can stylize the social as an EIN to determine that it is a lender and it is a grantor creditor. The date of the acquisition, remember we're talking about a mortgage here. This is a mortgage situation. Why? You can tell because of, well, it's $150,000, which isn't much nowadays, but in 2012 it could have been. The standard address of the borrower, which is the bank. And this is the verbiage on most of these contracts. Most of the 1099s will have this verbiage here. I didn't go ahead and change this because it's just a lot of typing to do, and I have a lot of things I need to get done, especially around tax season. What you want to do here is you want to prefix. A precursor is going to be this number here. This is obviously the account number of the mortgage here, right? This goes first. This goes over here. And what is this? It's the back of your social. If it's an F, it's a 06. If it's a D, it's a 04. If it's a G, it's a 07. And then your 8 numbers in the back. That's the big key of this whole video. Everything where you think needs a CUSIP number is where that number goes from. Why? Because they're going to draw off this connection here. Going to draw off the EIN number or the WFIT. That's why it says WFIT, because you're able to change that social. And the private side is this number, the back of, or the Federal Reserve routing. That needs to go first. The account number needs to go after that. So that's the important thing on the A. Not too difficult. There's 2 more examples. So the 2 examples are, again, the all cap name, but now with the NM WFIT behind it. With the N and WOOFIT, what you want to do is same thing with the social. It's only going to be one. And if you file electronically, make sure that your Social Security, you tick off the EIN so that one dash comes through. Again, they stylize Wells Fargo as a social. I think that's probably because people weren't doing this often. And, but it's not necessary. We could tell it because in electronic filings, we put it in both EIN numbers and it works. I wouldn't put that in there unless somebody tells us to do otherwise. At this point, it hasn't been the case. Okay? So this appears to be a car loan. I'm going to assume it's a car loan. It could be a real expensive credit card, but I don't think so. You got $25,000. So I'm going to assume it's a car. You've got the date. This seems to be 2010. The first, it's January 31st of 2010. I would use this type of date as well. They like to see the year first, just like they have up here. You want to see the year and then the date after. Again, the verbiage here is asset transfer for acquisition purchase. And it's going to be the back of the social. Let's run back up here. That's your 06. Now they just use a 987654332. Not a 1 because there's only 8 numbers. But you'll see that in all these examples, it's the same number, 987654332. This is just an example. And again, you'll see that number here with the account number afterwards. So switch those two guys around. Now, this is important on the A. Check if the borrower is personally liable. The only time you do not check it is when you are down here as a borrower, which is, it does happen. When you want to get a refund, a certain amount, the borrower is going to get the money. Here you're claiming as you being the original issue, and when you flip the contract, about the third time around when you send these 1099s out, or put them an administrative notice, the corrected version will be a 1099A of the same amount where you become the borrower, they become the lender because it supposes that they received your funds. And the 1099 OID, you're also going to be down here. Okay, so in the last example here is, again, social with 1 dash. And here's the Sprint Nextel. It's obvious what it is. It's only 1,800. But asset transfer TIH to discharge. Why does it say asset transfer? This is TIH means trust interest holder, which is in the codes. It's in the 1.1271 through 1.1275G. Talks about a trust interest holder. So again, here is going to be the first number, back of the social, and your account number. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about the B. Now with the B, this is important because if you heard my talks before, I always talk about the 1099A, the B, and the C as an administrative process, the indulgence of the claim or the act, the comparecencia or the coming to the confession. This is the B, this is the confession. This is where everything becomes flipped. This is where the barter comes in. So the barter is where you're going to start to flip the presumptive contract. It's important to use the B. Now, the IRS expects you to perfect the original issue discount. They're expecting you to go out into commerce and fill out the A, the B, and the C all within 30 days. What that means is you have to admit the 1099A and the OID, and 10 days later, you have to send out the 1099B. That's the barter. In most cases, you won't get the answer, and that's when you file the 1099B. Again, it's going to be for the same amount. These are 3 forms. You'll see 2 same amounts, the federal income tax withheld. Do fill out the amount reported, which should be the same, at least in the B. instance, do fill out the for official use only with the back of your social, and fill out both number 1 and number 2. Number 1 and number 2 is your social security number. Not the social security, your social security number with 1 dash and your employer identification number with 1 dash, both. Your signature, do not put UCC 1-308. I know people love to do that. ARR, and any type of verbiage you can put by, because it is this name of person to contact on behalf of this entity up here. If you put by or any other verbiage where you're taking away your signature won't be there. The IRS will say that your filings are deficient. Okay, this is one of those filings where you have to put your positive energy into it. Now, they signed in blue, but I recommend signing in red. Your numbers can be in blue, but make sure your signature is in red. Agent in commerce, always. And the date. Here's your B. Now, your B's, I think, have only 2 per sheet, so we use the 3rd sheet. And here's the other half of your mortgage. This is Bank of America again. And this is funny because on this form, it says payer's federal identification number. Now, here he is using the social with the 2 dashes because he's representing the all caps name as a WUFIT for the mortgage. So he's stating that here's the contract that's presumed, and the recipient was, now it's switched back to the EIN number. So it's a play on accounts. So I said you have to have some type of an insight to be able to see what these forms are doing. As you flip the contracts, the roles change here. So this is the important part. Exchange of signature for funds accessed. Always take that into account. Exchange of signature for funds accessed. And that's why that the social becomes the actual social. So that's where they're going to draw from. You'll see the QSIT number. What's the QSIT number? It's the back of the social. 987-65432. Right? With the 6 or the F. You can use a 6 or an F interchangeably on that 1096. I like to use the F just to distinguish it. And because there's only 1 square. So here is your B. And with the B, again, same style. The Social Security. Wells Fargo. Okay, we're talking about, let's say, the car loan. So the date of the acquisition, date of the sale, or exchange. We're putting here both the same date because we're assuming that the contract was the same date. There is no difference between one and the other when there is, like on a mortgage. Sometimes you find out about the mortgage, you file afterwards. So here's the $25,000, and the QSIP number is the most important thing. The account number you'll see, here's the same number. Okay, here's the account number. Let's change them though. This guy needs to go over here. This guy needs to go over here. To date, we still don't have void corrected. So this is the 3rd one. The 3rd is Sprint Nextel, and here's the date. Again, the social as the social, the recipient and their EIN number. Change these guys, and you'll see the QSIP is the back of the social. When it's void it out because there's nothing there. In that instance, you do put the void. If there's any 2 sheets on the paper forms, always void them out so that these aren't taken into account. Now we'll do the C. So you've sent out your A, you waited 10 days. You've sent out your B, you've waited 10 days. There's been no rebuttal. It's been accepted. Now you send out your C. There's 3 forms again. Same amount. What's the C? It's a cancellation of debt. You've canceled it. Now you've perfected your administrative claim on the tax side, on the private side. I would recommend doing an actual administrative claim with these 3 forms in it already. Well, 4 really, if you count the OID that goes with the A. But it's still three mailings that go out with it. Here's your for official use. Here's the same amount. And the only thing that changes is it's a C. So here's your C, same thing. And looky here. We've canceled it out, so we're back to the EIN. We're back to the boss. Right? We're with 150,000. Asset transfer for acquisition purchase, same as with the A. See, we flipped it and flipped it again. We gave the claim. We've turned the tables. We've rebartered. We've exchanged the signature. And now the asset transfer for acquisition purchase. Again, this should be over here. Really in this square, because of lack of space, sometimes I just put the exemption number, the back of the social here. You can put it or not, depending on what electronic program, or if you're using paper. It just depends on you. The important thing is it's an asset transfer for acquisition purchase. And also these three forms are used for the actual acquisition when you're buying something. Okay, which a lot of people leave out that B, but it's part of the administrative process. So here's the switcheroo. Again, here's the car mortgage. Remember, that's an M with it too. That one and the preceding ones are, well, this one is widely held because it's the mortgage, but this and the next one are NM with it because they're movable items. They're contracts only. They're services, they're goods. All of those are movable items. Okay, so here's the fair market value, and it says I'm supposing that this amount here is the interest. The fair market value is the interest on this loan, so that's kind of important as well. You're supposed to add these up at the end of your accounting as well. All number sevens are going to be one number, all number twos are going to be another number. It should be reflected up here, though, which it's not. Okay, and so the last one on the C is the all caps, non-mortgage woof it. It's not being corrected because it's the first time around. EIN, don't do that. It's supposed to be an EIN. Asset transfer to trust interest holder. Why the trust interest holder? To discharge debt. Because in these two instances, there's actual debt. You want to pay this off. To discharge the debt, it's a continual contract. It's a service contract. So it's the only instance where that service contract needs to be annulled completely. When you have a mortgage or even a collateralized debt obligation like a car, you may want to make these claims every year. Every single year that they make money on your contract, you can go back and claim those. Okay, so this is the actual OID. And the OID is that all caps name only, not the woof it or non-woof it. That doesn't go up here. It's just the filer, the name of the person to contact. Right, it's going to be the independent. It could be the 98 estate, doesn't matter. Regular signature, agent in commerce. Fill in that social security number as the 1- EIN number here on both spaces. And you'll see here that the federal income amount tax withheld is the number 4, and that should match the number 4 down here. This number 4 is different than the number 1. The original issued discount is going to be the exact amount on number 5. You see that the number 5 is a smaller amount than the number 4. So coming down into the OID, this is the amount of the loan. This is the amount of the loan after 30 years. So it's a difference between the two. Now these numbers could be different depending on what the interest rate is, etc., after the 30 years. If you're claiming the actual, because you can claim a federal income tax withheld, you're claiming the contract. You're not claiming the actual loan amount. You're claiming the contract and the projected amounts. I mean, that's a little confusing because how can you claim a projected amount? Well, they do it all the time in the stock exchange. They're always claiming projected or future amounts. And that amount you can technically get back every single year. So it's a lot of money. So a lot of people will still maintain these contracts open because they're going to get a derivative. amounts, which is a separate form, a 1099 DIV. At any rate, the 4 in of itself is the full contract, and this is the full loan. So here, it should mirror your 1099A, except for the amounts. Here we're doing, again, the SSN stylized is an EIN, and I would use a regular EIN number with 1 dash for your bank or mortgage company. And this verbiage is very important. It's issued IAW 26 CFR 1.1271-1.1275. It should be a G there, but sometimes they take it out because it takes too much space. It doesn't fit. So 1275 is fine. Put your exemption number over here. Remember, that's up here on your 1096. Same one. And here is your movable item, which is a non-mortgage. Okay, so here's your federal income tax withheld. Right? Remember, we're talking about original. Now we're talking about a contract. You're the original issue. That means that it went somewhere else, that it was securitized, it was moved, it was sold. So there's always going to be 2 amounts. That's why the form is so difficult to fill out, because some people don't know how to come up with these two numbers. Okay, first position over here. In other words, your the back of the SSN should be in the first position. Now here it says with private debt instrument acceptance. Okay, so it's alluding to that there's a private debt instrument out there. Well, that's what I talked about with your secured promissory note and your promissory note. There's also a secured bonded promissory, a bonded secured promissory note. That means it's drawn strictly off of your exemption bond that you have at the U.S. Treasury, which is a different one. Either those are proper, even a money order is proper, or a promissory note is proper. Either those are private debt instruments, but that's what it's alluding to, and it's obviously an acceptance. Trade acceptance, banker's acceptance, doesn't matter. It could just be shortened to say acceptance. Okay, and there's a spread. Same thing. Debt instrument, right? That you've written them as a money order with a coupon, and however style you're going to use, but there is a private debt instrument that was emitted. That's what you're claiming on the OID. The OID is very powerful in that you're claiming back whatever you put out there. Remember to always put everything, your private debt instruments, your UCC1, the original contract that's accepted, everything goes under that UCC1 or 3. Good. So that'll conclude these 1099s. And on another talk, I will go over the 1099 BTC, the bond tax credit that can be used for your private bonds, possibly the DIV, MISC, and INT. All right, so real quickly, didn't forget, but this is the other important thing. These 2 documents, which are going to go with the rest of your mailings. Now, they're calling for within the 30 days. Within 30 days, you have to file the 8281 because it's telling you where the money came from. And that's what we're going to go over. A properly filled out 8281 and 8811 will assure that your OIDs go through every single time. And this is the proper way to do it. Okay, so here's the all caps name. You don't have to put an MWIFIC behind it or WIFIC. Just the all caps name. This is your social. 1 dash. Okay, that was in all your 1099s. Remember, we're talking about the original issue specifically. So it is your social with 1 dash. Here we're not talking, because we're talking about an information return for publicly offered. It should say publicly and privately offered original, but that would be too much. So they just left it as publicly offered original issue instruments. Now, this is the address up to line 1, 1A, 1B, and 1C are the debtors or the original issue, the all caps name, the person in question. And 3A, B, C and D are going to be your bank, your mortgage company, your pretender lender, whatever that's going to be. Generally, it's a CFO, CEO, but you're going to give them the title behind it, right? So in this case, it's Robert D. Arno, fund manager, their telephone number, their address, right? City, zip code, all public. All public, doesn't matter. Even these could be up here, it could be public, because you're talking about the straw or franchise entity. It's fine, it doesn't matter. Here we're not waiving or flexing our secured party muscles. The CUSIP number, they tell you you can and can't. You have to put in this number for this to be effective. Now you have to know that it's the back of your social, right? Here it's a different number, but that's what that is. So this is a G with the 4 numbers behind it. Information. The issue date, well, that's going to be when the contract was up. Obviously, this seems to be, it says 2003, 2033, so it's a 30-year mortgage. The original issue price, well, this could be anything, but that was what was placed down there. That's what somebody probably got the information from, some CUSIP, actual CUSIP information, not the back of the social. The reason you're using the back of the social on the CUSIP number is because you're drawing from that account. So it's a contingent payment, number 7, the price of the principal amount, and again, it's a contingent. It's the interest rate is contingent, NA. The OID for the entire issue, so this is the number 4 for the entire issue. In this case, the actual number, I sanitized this, but it's a PIMCO. So this is one of the biggest birth certificate Social Security funds out there. But this is the information that needs to be on there. This is where you've gotten your CUSIP information, that fund, investment fund, the address for PIMCO. Now it's the bond number, the original bond number of UCC filing, secured party filing, that's that one right there. The CUSIP number for the actual fund. You can put it on there or not. The important thing to go on here is either the bond. It's because this is claiming an actual bond, the CUSIP, and the symbol. In other words, the public symbols. Don't confuse this with up here. It's two different things. But this has to have their EIN number, right? So you would take out this line. If you don't have it, it's mortgage or car insurance. You're not talking about in specific investments, but this EIN needs to go on there. Agent in commerce, signature. That's it. Within 30 days after date of issuance of OID instrument. So they're telling you that you have to send 2 copies of this and any attachments. So in other words, your approved 1099 electronic filings or copies of the red form should be sent to this address. Now this is an older form. It's 2010. I believe there's at least one other one, if not 2 newer ones. I like to use the old one because it has this information and the address right on it. It has a project number for what this is. Good. So again, we'll go through questions later if need be. I think that's pretty clear, depending on you. Next one is the 8811. So the 8811 is the information return for real estate mortgage investment conduits and issuers of collateralized debt obligations. Very easy. Now you can put this, you can put a tick if you know that it's a mortgage. It's obviously going to be a REMIC and you know that it was securitized and you know about where. Even if you don't have the information, you can put the REMIC, or you can leave both blank. Doesn't matter. So it's just a personal preference. They know which box to tick. Okay. All caps, same thing on the first one. Social, stylized as 1 dash, that's an EIN. The entire address of the all caps issuer. And the name of the bank and its his title holder, CFO, CEO. Your CUSIP, back of the social. Agent in commerce, date. That's it. That's all that needs to be on there. All the other items there are optional. So I hope that's clear enough. There's obviously many other forms, but these are the ones that I find people aren't filling out correctly, foreign or otherwise. And I hope that that answers most of the questions having to do with 1099s. We'll have some more talks coming soon. So thank you very much.